Jean Seberg, the star destroyed by scandal and silence. Jean Seberg was never meant to be ordinary. Discovered in Iowa at just 17 years old, she was plucked from obscurity by director Otto Preminger, who cast her in St. Joan, 1957. Though the film flopped, Jean's ethereal beauty and natural screen presence caught the eye of filmmakers abroad. Within a few years, she became the face of the French New Wave, immortalized in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, 1960. With her pixie haircut, effortless chic, and understated charisma, Seberg became an icon of modern femininity, bridging the gap between Hollywood glamour and European artistry. For a time, her life seemed enchanted. She was young, famous, and adored on two continents. But behind the stylish image lay fragility. Jean struggled with insecurity, navigating an industry that offered her both opportunity and exploitation. By the late 1960s, her career was thriving internationally, yet her personal life was unraveling. Then came the scandal that shattered her forever. Jean had become politically active, lending her support to civil rights causes, including the Black Panther Party. Her involvement drew the attention and the ire of the FBI. Under J. Edgar Hoover's notorious COINTELPRO program, she became a target of surveillance and harassment. Agents planted false stories in the press, most infamously a fabricated rumor that her unborn child was fathered by a Black Panther member. The cruel smear not only destroyed her reputation, but pushed Jean into despair. The consequences were devastating. In 1970, pregnant and fragile, Jean went into premature labor after reading the false reports. Her baby girl lived only 2 days. Seberg was inconsolable. At the funeral, she insisted on leaving the casket open, a tragic attempt to prove the paternity rumors false. The public humiliation, compounded by ongoing FBI surveillance, eroded her spirit. Though she continued to act, her career never fully recovered. She drifted between Europe and the U.S. Her once vibrant spark dimmed. Alcohol, prescription drugs, and depression consumed her. In 1979, at just 40 years old, Jean Seberg was found dead in Paris, her body discovered in a car parked on a quiet street. Officially ruled a probable suicide, the circumstances of her death have long remained clouded by suspicion and sorrow. Jean's story is chilling not only because of her youth, but because it illustrates the extreme vulnerability of even the brightest stars. She was destroyed not by fading talent or illness, but by a system that turned against her, where political persecution replaced applause, and silence became her final companion. Her end ties together the haunting theme of all 8 legends. Hollywood and the world beyond offered them glory but denied them dignity in farewell. From Veronica Lake's lonely bar shifts to Gene Tierney's battles with depression, from Rita Hayworth's stolen memory to Jean Seberg's cruel persecution, each story reminds us that stardom is no shield against the quiet cruelty of life. And it is here that we move to our final reflection, an exploration of why so many Golden Age legends slipped away without a farewell, and what these stories reveal about the price of fame. From the 1930s to the 1950s, Hollywood stood as the beating heart of global entertainment. It was the era of the studio system, when mighty empires like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Paramount controlled every frame of film, every rising star, and every dazzling premiere. The screens of the world flickered with dreams. Audiences lined up outside theaters, women in fur coats and men in press suits waiting to catch a glimpse of Clark Gable, Rita Hayworth, or Gene Tierney. Movies were more than stories. They were escape, fantasy, and hope wrapped in silver and celluloid. Behind this spectacle lay an intricate machine. Stars weren't just actors. They were carefully crafted products. Studios shaped their images, dictated their roles, even managed their private lives. Contracts were binding, often suffocating, leaving little room for personal freedom. A smile at a press event, a romance staged for headlines, even a haircut could be written into a clause. The system promised immortality on screen, but it often stole the humanity behind the curtain. For a time, it worked brilliantly. Hollywood was untouchable, and its legends seemed eternal. But as the years passed, cracks began to show. The rigid studio contracts that once guaranteed stardom also trapped actors in identities they no longer recognize. The pressure of maintaining perfection became unbearable. And when the lights dimmed, the silence was deafening. Some stars were simply replaced, discarded for newer, younger faces as though their brilliance had an expiration date. Others fell victim to scandal, whispers in the press magnified into career-ending storms. Still others succumbed to illness, addiction, or heartbreak, their struggles hidden until it was too late. This was the paradox of the Golden Age. While the world believed these actors lived charmed lives, many of them faced endings that were lonely, uncelebrated, and cruel. There were no farewell tours, no final curtain calls, no chance to say goodbye to the millions who once adored them. It is within this glittering yet unforgiving landscape that the stories of our 8 legends unfold. Each one captured the spirit of their time, only to vanish without warning. Some faded gradually, their names slipping from the marquees until they were remembered only in old photographs. Others disappeared suddenly, leaving behind rumors, confusion, and unanswered questions. They remind us that Hollywood's brilliance was built on fragile lives, and that behind every timeless film lies a story of human cost. And so, as we move forward, we'll step into the lives of 8 stars, icons of beauty, talent, and charisma, who disappeared from the stage of history without the farewell they deserved. Veronica Lake, Hollywood's lost siren. In the early 1940s, there was no face or hair more instantly recognizable than Veronica Lake's. With her petite frame, cool allure, and signature peekaboo hairstyle cascading over one eye, she became the very image of sultry Hollywood glamour. Films like This Gun for Hire, 1942, and The Blue Dahlia, 1946, cemented her as the quintessential femme fatale of the silver screen. Audiences were captivated, men swooned over her mysterious beauty, while women copied her hairstyle until it became a national trend. For a fleeting moment, Veronica Lake wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. But fame in Hollywood's golden age was never gentle, and Veronica soon discovered just how unforgiving the industry could be. Her roles, though popular, began to typecast her. Studio executives exploited her image while offering little support for her personal struggles. Behind the glamorous posters, she wrestled with alcoholism, failed marriages, and a reputation for being difficult on set. An accusation often leveled at actresses who dared to push back against the studio system. By the 1950s, the roles dried up. The once revered hairstyle that had made her famous was declared impractical during World War II, as women working in factories complained it was dangerous to mimic. Without her trademark look, the studios lost interest. And just like that, the woman once hailed as Hollywood's siren slipped into obscurity. What makes Veronica's story haunting is not just the speed of her fall, but the stark contrast between her screen persona and her real life. In her final years, far removed from the spotlight, she worked as a cocktail waitress in Manhattan under an assumed name. Customers sometimes recognized her, shocked to see a former icon serving drinks, but most did not. For Veronica, it was survival, stripped of the glamour and adoration that had once defined her life. She attempted small comebacks, low-budget films, occasional television appearances, but they were shadows of her former glory. Her memoir, Veronica, the autobiography of Veronica Lake, offered glimpses into the pain and resilience behind the facade. Yet when she passed away in 1973, at just 50 years old, it was in near anonymity. No farewell gala, no last tribute from the studios that had once profited from her beauty. Just a quiet departure, leaving behind reels of film that would outlive her. Her story is a reminder that Hollywood's embrace is fleeting, that a woman who once embodied allure itself could be forgotten while still alive. The legend of Veronica Lake endures on screen, but the woman herself slipped away without the farewell she so richly deserved. And she was not alone. While Veronica faded into the shadows of a New York bar, another actress, every bit as radiant, but burdened by inner torment, was enduring her own vanishing act. Gene Tierney, a woman whose beauty once defined an era, would find herself trapped in a silent battle of the mind that Hollywood refused to see. Gene Tierney, the silent battle Hollywood ignored. If Veronica Lake was the mysterious siren of the 1940s, Gene Tierney was its tragic goddess, an actress whose beauty seemed almost unreal. Born in Brooklyn in 1920, she was groomed for stardom from a young age. When she appeared in Laura, 1944, with her haunting elegance and enigmatic presence, critics hailed her as one of the most beautiful women ever captured on film. That single performance made her immortal in Hollywood history, cementing her as the face of mystery and desire. But perfection on screen often masked imperfection in life. Beneath the poised exterior, Jean carried a vulnerability that the cameras could never fully conceal. Her marriage to designer Oleg Cassini brought glamour but also turbulence. Her personal life soon collided with the unrelenting pressures of fame, and then came the tragedy that would alter her forever. During her first pregnancy, Jean contracted rubella, an illness that left her daughter Doria severely disabled, deaf, partially blind, and with intellectual impairments. The guilt consumed her. She often blamed herself, even though it was beyond her control. In an era when mental health was poorly understood, Hollywood offered no compassion, only silence. As the years passed, Jean's emotional struggles deepened. By the 1950s, she was diagnosed with severe depression. Shock treatments, common at the time, were prescribed repeatedly, leaving her disoriented and traumatized. Rather than shielding her, the studio system distanced itself. Rumors circulated that she was unstable, making her unhireable for major roles. For a woman once hailed as a goddess, it was a cruel descent. There were moments of light amid the darkness. In her autobiography, Self-Portrait, she spoke with raw honesty about her battles, breaking the silence around mental illness long before it became part of the cultural conversation. But her career had already slipped away. By the late 1950s, the glamorous premieres, the flashing bulbs, the scripts written just for her, all of it was gone. In her later years, Jean retreated to Houston, Texas, far from the noise of Hollywood. She lived quietly, occasionally making rare appearances, but never returning fully to the screen. When she died in 1991 at the age of 70, the world mourned, but her long absence had already dimmed her starlight in the public's memory. Her farewell had come decades earlier, silently, without the recognition owed to her talent and resilience. What makes Jean's story especially poignant is not only the beauty of what she once embodied, but the way she exposed a truth Hollywood preferred to hide, that its brightest stars could crumble under invisible burdens. She fought a battle no studio contract could script, one waged not on stage or screen, but within her own mind. Gene Tierney's story flows seamlessly into another actress who shocked Hollywood with her disappearance, but for entirely different reasons. Whereas Jean was swallowed by silence, Dolores Hart chose silence herself, walking away from fame at its peak to seek a life of devotion that left Hollywood reeling. Dolores Hart, the star who walked away at her peak. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Dolores Hart was one of Hollywood's brightest young stars. With fresh-faced beauty and radiant charm, she represented the new generation of leading ladies. Her debut role opposite Elvis Presley in Loving You on 1957 made headlines. She was the first actress to kiss the king on screen. The film catapulted her into instant stardom, and she quickly became one of the most sought-after actresses of her era. Dolores went on to star in films like Where the Boys Are, 1960, and Francis of Assisi, 1961, earning critical acclaim for her ability to balance innocence with depth. Hollywood insiders whispered that she was destined for the kind of long-lasting career that legends like Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn enjoyed. She had beauty, talent, and connections, everything a starlet could dream of. And then, just as her career was peaking, Dolores Hart shocked the world. In 1963, at only 24 years old, she walked away from Hollywood forever. There was no scandal, no dramatic fall from grace. Instead, she traded red carpets for silence, glamour for prayer, and the adoration of millions for a cloistered life behind the stone walls of a convent. Why would a woman with the world at her feet make such a decision? For Dolores, the answer was simple yet profound. During the filming of Francis of Assisi, she experienced what she described as a spiritual awakening. The story of St. Clair resonated deeply with her, stirring a sense of calling she could not ignore. In the interviews years later, Dolores explained that while she loved acting, it did not fulfill her soul. She yearned for something greater, something eternal. Her decision stunned Hollywood. The press ran headlines of disbelief. The Nun Who Kissed Elvis. Studio executives scrambled, fans speculated wildly, and colleagues were left heartbroken at losing one of their most promising stars. Unlike Veronica Lake or Gene Tierney, Dolores was not pushed out by scandal, illness, or fading roles. She simply chose a different path, one that most people could not comprehend. Life in the convent was far from easy. Dolores exchanged gowns for habits, wealth for vows of poverty, and Hollywood's spotlight for a life of service. She became Mother Dolores Hart, eventually serving as prioress of the Abbey of Regina Laudis in Connecticut. While she occasionally returned to the public eye, appearing in documentaries or speaking on faith, she never sought the limelight again. For her, the real stage was no longer Hollywood, but the spiritual life she embraced. Her story resonates not because it is tragic, but because it is startlingly unique. In an industry where most stars clung desperately to fame, Dolores chose to vanish voluntarily. She left at her peak when her future seemed brightest, ensuring that her departure would forever be remembered as one of Hollywood's most bewildering farewells. And yet, her story serves as a bridge to the darker tales that followed. Dolores Hart may have found peace in silence, but another Golden Age goddess, Rita Hayworth, would endure the cruelest kind of silence, robbed not by choice but by the slow erasure of memory itself. Rita Hayworth, the goddess forgotten by time. In the 1940s, Rita Hayworth was more than a star. She was a vision, a dream brought to life. Born Margarita Cancino, she was transformed by Columbia Pictures into Rita Hayworth, the ultimate Hollywood glamour girl. With her fiery red hair, magnetic presence, and sultry moves in films like Gilda, 1946, she became an icon of sensuality. One poster of her, hair cascading in waves, sold millions during World War II and was pinned up in barracks around the world. To soldiers, she was the pinup queen. To audiences, she was the epitome of desire. But the image of Rita Hayworth was carefully constructed, one that masked deep vulnerability. She was married 5 times, including to Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan, yet none of those relationships brought her lasting happiness. Behind the camera, Rita was soft-spoken, even shy, far removed from the bold seductress she played on screen. Her personal life often left her feeling isolated, as though she were always playing a role, never fully seen for who she truly was. By the late 1950s, the cracks began to show. Roles dwindled as Hollywood shifted to new faces. Her once celebrated beauty, though still radiant, was treated as past its peak by an industry obsessed with youth. More troubling, Rita began to show signs of forgetfulness, confusion, and erratic behavior. At first, people assumed it was alcoholism, a cruel label that clung to her in the gossip columns. But the truth was far more devastating. Rita Hayworth was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, decades before the illness was widely understood. In a time when little compassion or awareness existed, her condition was seen as scandal, not sickness. Friends and family watched helplessly as her memory slipped away. The woman who once captivated millions could no longer remember lines, faces, or even her own past triumphs. By the 1970s, Rita had retreated entirely from the public eye. The studios that once profited from her image offered no farewell, no tributes. She lived in quiet care, fading slowly, her once magnetic presence dimmed not by choice but by the cruel erasure of memory. When she died in 1987, the world mourned, but many had already forgotten the woman she had been. Her story is perhaps one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking. Unlike Dolores Hart, who chose silence, Rita was forced into it, stripped of her identity by illness. She had been the love goddess, the dream of an entire generation, yet in the end, she slipped away without the recognition or farewell she deserved. And as tragic as Rita's decline was, she was not alone. Another screen idol of the same era, Montgomery Clift, would endure his own slow disappearance, not through illness of the mind, but through the haunting scars of a single night that changed his life forever. Montgomery Clift, the beautiful face, broken by tragedy. In the pantheon of Golden Age actors, few burned as brightly or as briefly as Montgomery Clift. With piercing eyes and a vulnerability that set him apart from the polished leading men of his era, Clift redefined what it meant to be a Hollywood star. His performances in A Place in the Sun, 1951, From Here to Eternity, 1953, and The Misfits, 1961, made him a critical darling and a box office draw. Critics praised his naturalistic style, calling him one of the method pioneers alongside Marlon Brando and James Dean. To audiences, he was magnetic, brooding, soulful, unforgettable. But his brilliance came with fragility. Clift was notoriously shy, plagued by self-doubt, and uncomfortable with the fame thrust upon him. Still, he maintained a rising trajectory until one fateful night in 1956 changed everything. After leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift's car crashed into a telephone pole. Taylor was among the first to reach him, pulling broken teeth from his throat so he wouldn't suffocate. Though he survived, the accident left his once handsome face scarred and partially paralyzed. For an actor whose career relied on his looks, it was a devastating blow. Hollywood, cruel as ever, did not wait patiently for his recovery. Studios hesitated to cast him, fearing audiences wouldn't accept the new Clift. He returned to work, but his performances were shadowed by pain, both physical and emotional. Alcohol and prescription drugs became his companions as he tried to dull the torment. Friends described him as haunted, as if the crash had permanently fractured not just his face, but his spirit. By the 1960s, Clift was a ghost of his former self. He took roles sporadically, delivering flashes of his old brilliance, but never regaining the luster of his youth. On July 22, 1966, at the age of 45, Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack in his Manhattan apartment. The coroner described it simply as natural causes, but his friends called it the slowest suicide in Hollywood. He had lived, they said, in a constant state of decline since that terrible night. Montgomery Clift's story lingers because it embodies the fragility of beauty and fame. He was a man whose face once symbolized Hollywood's golden ideal, only to have it shattered in an instant. The industry that had celebrated him turned its back when he was no longer perfect. In the end, there was no grand farewell, just a slow fading until silence claimed him. And yet, his tragedy points us to another story, one rooted not in a single accident, but in a lifetime of barriers. While Clift struggled against the unforgiving expectations of Hollywood's beauty standards, Hattie McDaniel fought against the crushing weight of racism in an industry that celebrated her achievement, then refused to embrace her humanity. Hattie McDaniel, the trailblazer Hollywood refused to embrace. In 1940, Hattie McDaniel made history. When she stepped onto the stage of the Academy Awards to accept the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, she became the first African-American ever to win an Academy Award. It was a groundbreaking moment, a triumph not only for her but for generations to come. Her performance had been unforgettable, warm, commanding, and filled with depth that transcended the limited roles Black actors were allowed to play. But even on that historic night, the limitations of her era were painfully clear. McDaniel was forced to sit at a segregated table in the back of the Coconut Grove nightclub, far from her white colleagues. She delivered her acceptance speech with dignity, but the symbolism was stark. Hollywood would recognize her talent, but never fully accept her as an equal. Despite her Oscar, McDaniel's career options remained heartbreakingly narrow. Typecast almost exclusively as maids, cooks, and mammy figures, she faced criticism from both white Hollywood and segments of the Black community. To the studios, she was a convenient stereotype. To some activists, her roles seemed to reinforce damaging caricatures. But McDaniel defended herself with a sharp retort that echoed her survival instincts. "I'd rather play a maid than be one." As Hollywood evolved, the roles offered to her dwindled. The prestige of her Oscar win faded quickly, and the industry turned its back. By the late 1940s, she was working primarily in radio, becoming the star of The Beulah Show, the first national radio program to feature a Black actress in the lead. Yet even this success came with controversy, and her achievements were often overshadowed by prejudice. Her health began to decline in the 1950s. Diagnosed with breast cancer, McDaniel faced her final years in financial difficulty. When she passed away in 1952 at the age of 57, she left behind not only a legacy of resilience, but also a sobering reminder of Hollywood's hypocrisy. Even in death, she was denied her wish to be buried in Hollywood cemetery because of segregation. It wasn't until 1999 that a memorial was finally placed there in her honor. Hattie McDaniel broke barriers that few dared to confront, yet her farewell was muted, denied the dignity she had earned. Her story is both an inspiration and an indictment, a reminder that the Golden Age's glamour was built on a system that excluded and discarded those it deemed unfit for the spotlight. From McDaniel's fight against systemic prejudice, we turn now to another legend who, though white and once adored, found herself similarly discarded when the studios moved on. Clara Bow, the original It Girl, dazzled a generation, only to vanish into silence when Hollywood no longer had use for her. Clara Bow, the It Girl who lost herself in silence. Before Marilyn Monroe, before Veronica Lake, before any of Hollywood's platinum blondes defined sensuality, there was Clara Bow. In the 1920s, she embodied everything modern audiences craved: youth, energy, sexuality, and freedom. Dubbed the It Girl after her star-making role in the 1927 film It, Clara captured the spirit of the Roaring Twenties with a vibrancy that was impossible to ignore. She wasn't just a star, she was a cultural phenomenon. Clara's films consistently drew crowds, her name alone enough to guarantee ticket sales. With her wide eyes, playful smile, and ability to shift seamlessly between innocence and seduction, she symbolized the jazz age itself. Audiences adored her because she felt real, less polished than her peers, more raw, more alive. At the height of her fame, Clara Bow was one of the most recognizable women in the world, but fame brought relentless scrutiny. Clara's Brooklyn accent and working-class roots made her a target of elite Hollywood circles, who sneered at her lack of refinement. Gossip magazines feasted on rumors about her love life, painting her as reckless and promiscuous. The industry that owed her so much treated her with cruelty, magnifying every misstep into scandal. The transition from silent films to talkies dealt a further blow. While Clara's voice was perfectly adequate, the press mocked her accent and mannerisms, branding her unfit for the new sound era. Combined with her mounting anxiety and fragile mental health, the criticism became unbearable. She attempted to push forward, starring in a handful of talkies, but by the early 1930s, she had had enough. At just 28 years old, Clara Bow walked away from Hollywood. She retreated to a Nevada ranch with her husband, actor Rex Bell, far from the cameras and gossip. Though she occasionally dabbled in public appearances, her life became increasingly private. For decades, the woman who had once embodied the glamour and vitality of an entire generation lived in near-complete obscurity. Tragically, Clara's later years were marred by mental illness. She suffered from severe depression and was in and out of psychiatric care. The vibrant young woman who had electrified screens with her energy now lived in shadows, haunted by the fame that had once lifted her. When she died in 1965 at the age of 60, the world mourned quietly, but for many her name had already become a nostalgic footnote to a bygone era. Clara Bow's story is perhaps the purest example of Hollywood's ruthless cycle: a star built up, consumed, and then forgotten. She was the first true sex symbol of cinema, yet her farewell was not a standing ovation, but silence. And from the silence of Clara Bow, we arrive at the final story in our journey. One not of fading fame, but of scandal, surveillance, and a mysterious death that still leaves questions unanswered. Jean Seberg, the international star who captivated both Hollywood and Europe, would meet an end as tragic as it was controversial. Jean Seberg, the star destroyed by scandal and silence. Jean Seberg was never meant to be ordinary. Discovered in Iowa at just 17 years old, she was plucked from obscurity by director Otto Preminger, who cast her in St. Joan, 1957. Though the film flopped, Jean's ethereal beauty and natural screen presence caught the eye of filmmakers abroad. Within a few years, she became the face of the French New Wave, immortalized in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, 1960. With her pixie haircut, effortless chic, and understated charisma, Seberg became an icon of modern femininity, bridging the gap between Hollywood glamour and European artistry. For a time, her life seemed enchanted. She was young, famous, and adored on two continents. But behind the stylish image lay fragility. Jean struggled with insecurity, navigating an industry that offered her both opportunity and exploitation. By the late 1960s, her career was thriving internationally, yet her personal life was unraveling. Then came the scandal that shattered her forever. Jean had become politically active, lending her support to civil rights causes, including the Black Panther Party. Her involvement drew the attention and the ire of the FBI. Under J. Edgar Hoover's notorious COINTELPRO program, she became a target of surveillance and harassment. Agents planted false stories in the press, most infamously a fabricated rumor that her unborn child was fathered by a Black Panther member. The cruel smear not only destroyed her reputation, but pushed Jean into despair. The consequences were devastating. In 1970, pregnant and fragile, Jean went into premature labor after reading the false reports. Her baby girl lived only 2 days. Seberg was inconsolable. At the funeral, she insisted on leaving the casket open, a tragic attempt to prove the paternity rumors false. The public humiliation, compounded by ongoing FBI surveillance, eroded her spirit. Though she continued to act, her career never fully recovered. She drifted between Europe and the U.S. Her once vibrant spark dimmed. Alcohol, prescription drugs, and depression consumed her. In 1979, at just 40 years old, Jean Seberg was found dead in Paris, her body discovered in a car parked on a quiet street. Officially ruled a probable suicide, the circumstances of her death have long remained clouded by suspicion and sorrow. Jean's story is chilling not only because of her youth, but because it illustrates the extreme vulnerability of even the brightest stars. She was destroyed not by fading talent or illness, but by a system that turned against her, where political persecution replaced applause, and silence became her final companion. Her end ties together the haunting theme of all 8 legends. Hollywood and the world beyond offered them glory but denied them dignity in farewell. From Veronica Lake's lonely bar shifts to Gene Tierney's battles with depression, from Rita Hayworth's stolen memory to Jean Seberg's cruel persecution, each story reminds us that stardom is no shield against the quiet cruelty of life, and it is here that we move to our final reflection, an exploration of why so many Golden Age legends slipped away without a farewell, and what these stories reveal about the price of fame. What binds these 8 stories together is not simply that they were famous or that they belonged to Hollywood's Golden Age. It is the way they left, quietly, often painfully, denied the kind of farewell their brilliance should have commanded. Each disappearance was unique, yet when placed side by side, patterns emerge. The first and perhaps most glaring is the cruelty of the studio system. Stars like Veronica Lake and Clara Bow were manufactured into images so powerful that they became inseparable from their identities. But when the image no longer suited the times, or when their humanity broke through the mask, the system discarded them without hesitation. Lake's iconic hairstyle fell out of fashion during the war. Bow's accent clashed with the arrival of sound, and suddenly the women who had once drawn millions to theaters were treated as relics. Hollywood demanded perfection, and when perfection faltered, the stars were quietly ushered off stage. For others, the enemy was internal, the fragility of mental health, long misunderstood and stigmatized. Gene Tierney's silent battles with depression and psychiatric treatments robbed her not just of her career, but of her sense of self. Rita Hayworth's decline from Alzheimer's was cruelly mislabeled as alcoholism, a reflection of an industry quick to shame but slow to understand. Even Montgomery Clift, haunted by trauma and self-destruction after his car accident, found himself trapped in a spiral that the public consumed as gossip rather than tragedy. These were not failures of talent or dedication, but failures of compassion in a system that demanded stars remain invincible. Then there is the insidious role of public judgment. Hattie McDaniel's Oscar win should have been a triumphant beginning, yet it became a bittersweet milestone. Hollywood celebrated her achievement, but never allowed her to transcend the roles of servitude it had confined her to. Her farewell was marked not by applause, but by exclusion, even in death when she was denied burial in Hollywood's own cemetery. Jean Seberg, meanwhile, suffered the most brutal form of judgment, targeted harassment by her own government. Her persecution reveals that fame offers no protection when political and social forces decide to silence a voice. And yet, not every disappearance was born of tragedy. Dolores Hart's decision to leave Hollywood for a convent was radical, but it was also an assertion of agency rarely seen in her time. She chose her silence. But even in her case, Hollywood framed her departure as a scandal, as though the industry could not fathom a woman willingly rejecting its promises of eternal glory. Her story underscores another theme: the inability of Hollywood, and perhaps society at large, to accept when stars seek fulfillment beyond the screen. What these legends share is a stark truth. In Hollywood, farewells are rarely grand, and often not offered at all. The industry thrives on constant renewal, always chasing the next face, the next hit, the next box office darling. Once a star no longer fits the mold, they are left behind, their absence explained away in whispers rather than celebrated in gratitude. Audiences move on, the spotlight shifts, and the silence grows. But silence, as we've seen, can be devastating. For Lake, it was a bar counter in anonymity. For Tierney, it was psychiatric wards and forgotten scripts. For Hayworth, it was a disease that erased her very self. For McDaniel, it was segregation, even in legacy. And for Seberg, it was a parked car on a quiet Paris street. These silences were not mere endings. They were erasures, stripping away the dignity of lives that had once brought so much light. And yet, through film, their images endure. On the screen, Clara Bow still dances with youthful abandon. Montgomery Clift still gazes with soulful intensity. Rita Hayworth still tosses her hair in Gilda, forever radiant. The movies freeze them in time, immortal, even as life denied them proper farewells. Their vanishing acts remind us that behind every reel of film lies a real human being, vulnerable, imperfect, and subject to the same frailties as anyone else. The difference is that when they fell, the whole world was watching, yet so few offered a hand. And so we arrive at the inevitable question: if Hollywood's brightest legends could disappear so quietly, what does that say about the industry? And about us, the audience, who loved them while the lights were on, only to let them fade when the credits rolled? Hollywood's golden age is remembered for its glittering premieres, its dazzling gowns, and the timeless films that still flicker across our screens. But behind the glamour, the stories we've uncovered reveal something far more haunting: that even legends can vanish without applause, without closure, without a single farewell. Veronica Lake pouring drinks in anonymity, Gene Tierney silenced by her own mind, Dolores Hart walking away in search of peace, Rita Hayworth robbed of memory, Montgomery Clift fading after one cruel night, Hattie McDaniel celebrated, then excluded, Clara Bow locked in silence, Jean Seberg destroyed by lies. Each of them reminds us that fame is fragile, that the applause fades, and that the lights eventually dim. But perhaps more importantly, they remind us that stars are not myths. They are human beings, vulnerable to the same pains, losses, and injustices as the rest of us. And yet, even in their absence, they remain. On screen, they are eternal. Veronica still smolders behind her blonde curtain of hair. Tierney still gazes enigmatically in Laura. Rita still dances in Gilda. Clift still aches with intensity in A Place in the Sun. Clara Bow still laughs with abandon, as though the jazz age will never end. Their films outlive the silence, allowing us to remember not how they left, but how they lived. As we close this chapter, one question lingers. Do we, as audiences, bear some responsibility? Do we celebrate stars only when they shine, forgetting them once they fade? Or can we honor their humanity as fiercely as we once adored their beauty? The legends of Hollywood may have left without a farewell, but we can give them one now, by remembering, by speaking their names, and by ensuring that their stories are not lost to silence. If you want to continue exploring the hidden truths of Hollywood, the triumphs, the tragedies, and the secrets that cameras never showed, be sure to subscribe and join us. Because behind every shining face is a story waiting to be told.